Marvellous. So, huge welcome from me and from Opus to our evening's discussions. Are you well?
I am. I'm very well. In fact, I'm by the seaside. So out there is the English Channel.
Right. So
well, I can't show you, obviously, but I'm actually on the seafront.
It's
in Sidmouth in Devon.
That is good to hear. It's good to hear. I should say to everybody that we first met back when we were both at Purcell School, when you were a extremely fine oboist, mostly. Is that fair to say? Oboe was your principal study?
Oboe was my principal. I played violin as well, but I gave it up when I was about 16, and I played piano too.
Piano, yeah.
And I started singing.
When you started singing at Purcell?
But Oboe was my principal. Sorry?
You started, that's okay, I interrupted you. You started singing at Purcell?
Yeah, I mean, it was, as you'll remember, it was a huge part of our training there to do. Well, we used to do oral training every morning with the Kodai method. And so we started singing madrigals and a lot of modal music. And then we had the school choirs and chamber choirs and so on. So yeah, that's where I started out.
So, I mean, after Purcell, you spent a sort of year being an oboist. That's correct, pretty much? Or did you took a year off from university?
No, I actually had 2 go years, partly by mistake. And I ended up playing oboe for a theatre company and travelling around the UK, and we went to the States as well. So I was, on stage oboist for a large part of those 2 years.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting to me is you then went to Oxford, you were a Call Scholar, you were reading music, obviously, and that's a very traditional route. So where did you first get interested in folk music? I mean, where did that come from? Because I guess I didn't. You are at least a couple of years younger than me, and so I didn't know that wasn't really part of the school.
I'm actually quite a lot younger than you. You were a head boy, and your final year when I came, I was 5 years younger than you. Well, I still am, obviously.
Well, I'd forgotten the head boy thing, so I'm grateful to be reminded of my achievements.
The folk interest actually goes back to Purcell School. When we were doing Kodai method of oral training, we used lots of modal music. And coming from a very strictly classical diatonic background, the sound of modal music was quite exotic. And we used lots of folk songs in that training as well. That's where I first heard English folk song, and I just fell in love with it. And around the same time, we were also performing music by Vaughan Williams, who incorporates lots of traditional songs into his music. And I was captivated by that. And so I just started getting more interested in the English 20th century art music, revival or folk music, Williams, Holst, Delius. And one of my classmates, who I'm still friends with now, said to me, "Oh, if you like folk music, you'll like this band." And she gave me a tape of Jethro Tull, which is prog rock, but some of it was quite folk influenced in the late 70s. Yeah. And I loved it. And from there, I started to listen to Steel Span, Fairport Convention, all the folk rock groups, and then started going back to source material and going to the folk club at Cecil Sharp House in Camden in London. I used to cycle there, and the barman would serve me underage. That was another incentive. And and that's when I started really getting into the roots of the tradition. And then when I was 18 or 19, I went to the first ever National Cider Festival in Camden, and the resident band for the event was a band called the Yetis, who some of you might know. If you listen to the Archers, well, if you listen to it in the old days before lockdown, on the Sunday morning omnibus, that's the Yetis playing the Archers theme tune with accordions and so on. And I got talking to them, and it transpires that the singer, his surname is Sartin, and he said, there is a body of songs, traditional folk songs, that have been collected from the Sartin family in 1905 to 1907, and that was it. I was off on the folk train.
So you have your family have a sort of folk history, as it were.
Yeah, although it's not a continuous one, but Yes, and then subsequently, when I went up to Oxford, I started to go to all the folk sessions, the folk club there, and the pub sessions. And there was a large Irish contingent in Oxford, so that plus students plus the sort of Morris tradition, the Cotswold Morris tradition, meant there was loads of music going on in the pubs, and you could go to an informal session every night. And so, you know, when I was theoretically studying music at Oxford, I was actually doing my apprenticeship in the pubs of East Oxford at night time.
So how did this sort of affect your playing and your singing? Because obviously, if you've been knocking out a Magnificat and an Optimissus every evening, and then you'd be going off and singing folk and playing, how did that affect how you played and how you sang?
Well, that's a very good question, actually, because it's taken me years and years to find my own voice, because I was approaching traditional song as a formal singer, and it was very that sort of delivery, and with the sort of classical enunciation, and it's taken me, well, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, actually, when I started singing a traditional song. Yeah, so my friend came into the room and said, "Oh, you sound like a proper folk singer now," because I'd started to sing in my own voice. And a lot of the old traditional singers used to talk about saying a song and not singing a song, and I think that's really pertinent, because actually it's delivering it in your own voice that comes first. But I can still do the classical thing, and I was singing it with just a cathedral about 5 years ago.
Right.
I had to switch. I had to switch brains.
Yes. So it's a brain thing. I mean, what would you say then as a folk singer that you're focusing them pretty much entirely on the text?
Yeah, you're focusing on delivering the story, and it's not about virtuosity. It's about clarity, and you're a vessel for a traditional song. It's not about you. You have to sort of, or at least pretend to forget about ego.
Yeah, that's it's important. And so, what about the oboe? So, I mean, for me, I wouldn't say oboe was a particularly traditional folk instrument. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're correct. I mean, oboes were too expensive for the working folk to ever have. They're quite elaborate instruments. And when I started on the folk scene, there were two other people who played oboe, neither of whom are playing now. So there was no precedent, and I just had to find my own path and find the sort of tunes that suit the oboe. And I mean, a lot of French stuff suits the oboe because they've got their tradition of the bombard and bagpipes, particularly in northern France, and song accompaniment. I mean, traditionally people use things like violins and flutes in folk music. No reason to not use an oboe.
Right. So when you're coming to a new song, you tend to do a lot of you do your own arrangements of them.
Yes. Well, the minute that you sing a traditional song, you have it. It is your own arrangement. There's no copyright and there's no set way of performing because there are no markings. No tempo markings or anything. You just the minute you perform it, it's your own song. And yeah, we do our arrangements. We tend to do them together. But sometimes we do them down the phone, particularly at the moment. And we bring our own influences. Whether it's classical, early music, rock, pop music, whatever. We bring those influences to the tradition, and that's very important because the tradition has to be something that keeps moving forward and evolving. Otherwise, it's just a fossilized museum music.
Yeah. So we ought to move on to talk a little bit about Bellowhead because they were a massive sort of huge new influence on the folk scene when they started. So just tell us a bit about that. I don't know whether it's apocryphal, the background that the two guys were stuck in a traffic jam and thought, oh, who are the people we'd most like to play with? And all that. I mean, is that actually true?
It is actually true. I was due to go on stage at Hitchin Folk Club, and I was just having a meal before the gig, and I got a call from the two Johns, who were a performing duo already, saying, we're on the M25, do you want to be in the band? And that's how it started.
Yeah. So it's an interesting phenomenon, I think. For me, particularly interesting, you've got a lot of really great musicians. A lot of great musicians all at the top of their game, suddenly gathered in one room. So how did that actually work? I mean, when you were rehearsing, what sort of rehearsal leadership was it? How did that actually work? Because you can't have everybody going, no, we've got to do it like that, we've got to do it like that, or no, if I was doing it, I'd do it like that. So how did that must have taken time to find that sort of voice.
To be perfectly honest, the only modus operandi was for individuals in the band to arrange pieces and score them out in Sibelius or whatever and give it to the rest of the band. And then at that point, we'd rehearse together and we'd make further changes. The brass players would make things more brass-like. If one of the non-brass players was arranging, we'd elaborate or improvise on our lines and find a way of making it us and getting off the page as quickly as possible. But there was only one piece we ever sort of arranged without dots. And we never recorded it either, but it was a very, very difficult process.
Right. So when you're then with that sort of group, were the performances opportunities to improvise further, or it's like it's too tight? You've got to or did that start to happen after you've been performing for a couple of years or whatever?
After a few years, yes, we started writing arrangements that left space for improvisation, particularly from the jazzers and also from the fiddles. So yeah, there was a flexibility in it, but there were certain pieces and certain moments of the pieces where we had to be tight.
So, but in terms of was there like a leader? Was there one person who, if there was going to be something that needed sorting, or did that never ever arise? Because I can understand a string quartet, you get a string quartet, normally there's one who's like a little bit more bullshit than the other three. But when you've got like 15, that's a lot of people.
Well, if you asked all 11 members of the band who was the leader, you'd get 11 different answers, I think. No one had final say on anything. I suppose... except maybe the arrangers of that particular piece.
Right.
Because most people in the band contributed arrangements. They get the final say.
Did you realise early on that this was something big?
Yeah. Our very first gig, the band was assembled really for Oxford Folk Festival, the first Oxford Folk Festival, and it was an experiment and we didn't think it would last very long. And at that very first gig in the Oxford Town Hall, the audience all got up and started dancing around in a way I'd never seen at a folk gig before. And we were blown away by it and just thought, this really has legs. And then that summer we played at Sidmouth Folk Festival, which is where I am now, Sidmouth. And the crowd were dancing so much, they broke the dance floor. And then we brought out an EP, and it was just meant to be a demo EP, and we recorded it on the County Road in Oxford. It wasn't particularly polished. Got sent out as a promo to venues and so on, and the next thing it got awarded at one of the folk awards, the BBC Folk Awards. It was a momentous time, actually. We just didn't see... We had no idea where it was going to go, and then the next thing we were doing in Glastonbury, we were working at Abbey Road. It's quite overwhelming. And I got asked recently to write some notes for... We were re-releasing our album from 10 years ago, Hedonism, and I got asked to write some memoirs about those days, and I can't even remember a lot of it. It was such a blur, but very exciting.
A blur in terms of it was just you were doing so much, and it was all just, the band was just like a phenomenon that just sort of took off, and you were just part of it.
Yeah, I mean, we spent days at the BBC doing interviews. We got interviewed. I got misquoted in The Guardian. That's one of my claims to fame. We played for Chris Evans. We played at Covent Garden. We played at the Proms. And it was just, we got swept off our feet.
What do you think it was?
I think the world was ready, or certainly Britain was ready for something that had a traditional element. It was grassroots fun music.
Right.
And it also coincided with the sort of growth of festivals. I think people were getting really sick and tired of synthetic pop music and wanted something a bit more real.
Yeah, and do you think there were any compromises? I mean, as a folk musician, do you think that other folk musicians got it, believed in it, or was it, oh, this is just like, this is too popular, as it were? I know that's a slightly crazy thing, but it can sometimes be that, particularly, the way they're doing this stuff, this is crossover now.
Yeah, we certainly had our detractors, and people thought it was too raucous or whatever, the older generation. But actually now, I think actually during time they accepted us because they saw the knock-on effect that traditional English music was being played on national radio and national TV and inspiring youngsters who then have gone out to look for themselves for traditional music, and they've kept folk music alive. So, and I think Bellowhead contributed to that. There were always going to be naysayers, particularly in what has been often a slightly conservative genre. But if you're not creating waves, you're not pushing the envelope, to mix metaphors.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that. So do you miss it?
Terribly, I really do. And we've just put together a homemade video of the 11 of us playing what was our biggest hit single, New York Girls, to coincide with the release of the re-release of that particular album. And we all did it from our bedrooms, whatever, and stitched it together. It's actually really good fun. And I must admit, after doing it and seeing the finished thing, I had a little moment. And it was really nice to be back with everyone, because we were a family. We were together for 12 years. We toured together, we slept in the bus together. We've all seen each other have children and watched our families growing up together. And we're still all in touch. We're still all friends, and we still work together. And yeah, I do miss it.
So did it have to finish? I mean, it was on a roll, wasn't it?
I think it was time for it to finish. I think it was best to stop these things when you're at the peak, rather than let them roll on and eventually become a sort of tribute act to yourself. And then the lead singer decided he wanted to leave anyway. I've got to admit, I was getting really tired of touring. And some of us were. And on the very last tour, we went out with 2 sleeper buses, caterers, a pantechnicon, a trailer. The whole team comprised nearly 30 people. And there were 2 viruses going around, one on each bus. So I ended up having to go on antibiotics. And just the stress of it all, and sleeping in a bus with 11 other people, it's not right. And so when it finished, I actually was relieved. But 5 years down the road, or whatever it is now, it's 4 years, I do really miss it. And if anyone wants to have a look at Bellowhead online, if you go to our YouTube page, you'll see the video of New York Girls that we put together about 2 weeks ago, and it's really good fun.
Yeah, cool. That's really cool. So how do you think it changed you as a musician and a performer? Because it must, as you say, this is 12 years. That's an enormous chunk of your performing life.
I don't know if it did change me. I think maybe I learned more about the theatrical aspects of performing, because normally we just stand on stage and we play and we talk to the audience, but this was sort of using movement and staging and so on, and I think that might have informed the things I've done since. And working with people from different influences, the jazzers, with the brass section were jazzers, everyone brought their own genre and influences. I suppose I've learned from them as well, particularly the trumpet player who's really good at scoring jazz. I learned a few things from him. So yeah, it's helped me grow as a musician, definitely. I think in other ways it's affected me. My partner said to me at the time, she said, every time you go on tour with Bellowhead, you age 6 months. So I think it's had a lasting effect on me as well.
just purely the exhaustion of doing all the gigs.
Yeah. And literally after the very last Bellowhead gig, which we did at Oxford Town Hall, coming round First Circle, I went home and I fell over and had to be put to bed.
So what do you think within, what makes a good performer in terms of folk music then, do you think? And do you think it's particularly different in the folk scene than the classical scene?
I think there is definitely a big difference. I think in the folk scene, it's going back to what we were saying earlier, it's not about self, it's not about virtuosity, it's about being a tradition bearer. and that has to always be borne in mind when he's singing and performing things. Let the song speak for itself, and try to not use artifice. Of course, we do use artifice, but it's a different sort. And I think technique, for instance, you just have to put it on a bit of a back pedal. So it's a very different aesthetic.
So that's suggesting that the technique is not so important, but the technique is important.
The technique's there to support one singing in a way that's as natural as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
what about with the playing, though? Because like quite a lot of the stuff that you do, you're sort of singing and playing at pretty much the same time often.
Yeah, I mean, technically, traditional melodies can be quite difficult, particularly the ones from the Celtic traditions and from Northumbria. You have to have a very good technique to play them. English fiddle's a bit of an open season because there is no one particular style. There's no school of English fiddle, whereas if you play Irish fiddle, you might go to the Saturday morning schools and learn it, or same in Scotland. In England, there is no school, and the way you play is, I suppose you're informed by the people around you and what you listen to. But it doesn't mean that you have to have bad technique, and I think there's a balance to be had.
Yeah.
Good
How many
support playing in a style?
Would you say that most of certainly the members of Bellowhead, most of the musicians that you work with have come from a classical background initially?
Not very many, actually. Surprisingly few. I think maybe for the older generation that might have been true, but for the younger ones, there are now loads of workshops for young people. There are residential courses. There are university degrees now in traditional music, so a lot of them have actually just come through the folk world.
Right, and so now, Bellowhead's behind you. You've got Belshazzar's Feast is your principal band now.
One of them. I mean, although we're going to stop touring in a couple of years because my colleague is quite a lot older than me and he's tired of it. But yes, I suppose Belshazzar's sort of comedy duo is the principal one, and then I've also got a trio called Faustus. Yeah. And we tour and record quite a lot as well.
Right. And so how do you see, what would you like to be doing over the next sort of couple of decades? I mean, are there things you feel you'd really like to explore with your sort of musical world that you haven't done?
Yes, actually. I've just started working solo, which I've been wanting to do for years, but never really had the confidence all the time to do it. And I got offered an online Zoom solo concert, and my first one ever. And it's my first Zoom concert and my first solo concert. And I've done one subsequently, and I've really loved it. And then a friend of mine who runs a music venue pub in London said, "Would you come down and do a concert in our garden now the lockdown has eased?" And she said, "Would you do it solo?" And I thought, yeah, a solo gig, live. So that's a real challenge. But the more I thought about it, I realised I wasn't sure I could get a full sort of 2 45-minute set together of me singing and playing solo. And I said this to my friend, and she said, "Why don't we get a support act? Why don't you get one of your kids?" And actually now it's turned into Sartin and Sons, and I've got 2 of my boys coming down and playing and singing on their own, and then with me as well. And awesome. We've got the idea of actually getting a family band together, sort of folk Von Trapp family. So that's what I want to be doing.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're doing a solo gig, what does that comprise? I mean, you're doing like accompanying yourself, piano, fiddle.
Yeah.
You can't often play the oboe at the same time. Yeah.
No, I've only done sort of solo over pieces. It doesn't work so well, but for a long time I've been accompanying myself on the violin when I sing. But I've never used the piano. The piano's not used by many folk musicians, and they can be a bit snobby about it. But actually, increasingly, we're using the piano. And I thought, well, I've got no choice. I'm at home. I'm trying to learn the concertina really unsuccessfully. So I thought, I'll try the piano out. And it's worked. And I've had really good feedback. So when I do my live solo gig, I'll take my Casio keyboard, Yamaha clavi, whatever it's called, and use that and play Clavinova. and then I'll also accompany myself on the violin, and I'll do some solo singing as well.
Right.
Unaccompanied.
Yeah. So, what about composition? Because you've done quite a bit of composition. You composed you arranged a carol for me a few years ago. Because that's been quite a big part of your world as well.
It is, and going back to what you said about arranging traditional songs, that is composition as well. And we write tunes and so on, but I've started doing a bit more sort of serious composition as well. Akin to the piece that I wrote for you, David, I've been doing more of that sort of thing too, which I really like. I mean, I love doing it. It just happens when it happens. If people ask,
Yeah. Is there a folk opera?
Sort of, yeah. And we staged it 2 years ago, and it's called The Transports. And it's the story about the first transport of convicts to Australia. And in the 70s, a chap called Peter Bellamy wrote a load of songs about it, and they were stitched together with a sung narration. So yeah, basically a folk opera, and we've completely rejigged it and put it on 2 years ago and the year before, and toured it around the country and so on.
And in terms of the sort of folk music itself, I mean, you focus mostly on the English tradition, is that? And when you're like traveling to other countries to perform, do you like look out for some of their stuff and their performers to listen to, and sort of see how that might influence the stuff you do?
Yeah, I went to Turkey and I've been working with Turkish musicians, which is quite interesting to try and make two very different musical languages work together. And yeah, wherever I go, I always try and source out music. And I went to France and ended up joining in with a Fest Noz in Brittany. Yeah, I don't know if it's particularly influenced me, but I find it very interesting, and I love trying to work with people who have different traditions.
Yeah.
Background.
And how does the traditions within, the folk songs, what sort of era are we talking about most of them come from?
It's difficult to put a finger on it. A lot of the older ballads were first noted and written down in the early 18th century. We think a lot of them date back to before then, but there aren't many records. But certainly, by the late 1600s, early 1700s, there were some older ballads. But there are different scenes. I mean, the folk music is not a definition; it's a description, really, because there are so many different currents that have informed folk music. Musical ballad sheets, which were printed up, broadside ballads, as we call them. They were sort of songs written on themes of the day, a bit like tabloids, a murder or a battle or whatever. And these things were written and printed up in major conurbations, and then were sung by hawkers around the country. And they entered the oral tradition, and those broadside ballads date from the 1600s to the early 1900s. So there's that sort of that literary influence as well. Then you get what so-called national songs that were composed by bona fide composers that have entered the oral tradition. Yeah, musical, as I say, even now in traditional music, it's evolving, and people are, the kids are writing traditional music to house dance beats. In the 1950s, there were Morrisides who would play rock around the clock for Morris dancing.
People are writing stuff now. Where is it coming from?
Well, I mean, things like all the archives have been cleaned to death, so a lot of the traditional songs everyone knows, but there's always new stuff to be found, and that inspires you to make new arrangements of old songs. There are people writing songs in a traditional style or on traditional themes. All sorts of people, actually.
But would you say that what would you say is the music that is being written now by whoever that is going to, if you like, be the sort of stuff that someone might find and arrange in 100 years' time?
Well, I'll tell you a little anecdote. I was teaching some teenagers at the weekend on Zoom, Southwest Music School, so they're all in the West Country, and I tasked them all with finding a traditional song or tune from their locality and then arranging it. And one of the women came up with a song, and she said, we all sing it in the pubs around here in Cornwall, and it's a song about Cornish emigration. She said, I don't know anything about it, I don't know where it comes from, but I just know this song. And she sang it, and I said, well, actually, I know the guy who wrote it. and he's from a popular duo called Show of Hands, a chap called Steve Knightley. Oh, I don't know, 10 years ago. And already 2 years ago, and I went to the pub, and there was a traditional only tune session going on, and I sat in the corner with a pipe just listening, keeping a low profile. And they started playing one of the tunes that I'd written, but didn't know it was by me, and thought it was anonymous. And at that point, I posted up on Facebook, I am now anon. I am now trad anon. Now my work here is done.
Well, indeed, and there is nothing else for you to do. You have made it.
That's it.
In terms of like some of the other forms of music, do you see folk now coming into like other popular forms of music from I don't know, hip hop or whatever?
I'd like
is there any overlap?
There is not much.
In some ways, some of these things are coming from a similar sort of background. It just is a contemporary background rather than, if you like, a country background.
I mean, there are attempts to fuse tradition and modern music, and there's an outfit called the Demon Barbers who put on traditional song and dance with rappers and break dancers, or whatever they're called now. I'm showing my age. And they fuse that. And so there are things happening. And in the more commercial world, I mean, Mumford & Sons had enormous success, and they weren't playing folk music. People thought they were, because they were using a more traditional instrumentation, like the banjo. And so that has helped to feed at least the folk vibe into the more general consciousness.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I'm sure some of our folk will have some questions for you. So I might just open the floor and see what other people, because I know that some people have been huge fans as well. First question, Bellowhead reunion. We're sort of feeling that until you all have massive tax bills to pay in 10 years, that's not going to happen.
It's been mooted. The idea of a reunion has been mooted, and we return to the idea every year or so, around when our tax returns are due. I'm not saying never again, and I think having done that reunion video, it's inspired us all a bit more to perhaps do something. I can't say any more than that.
No, well, that's fair enough.
I'd like to. My bank manager would like us to get back together again.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah. How often does Paul get to Halsway Manor in Somerset?
I have to correct you there, David. It's pronounced Halsey.
I do apologise.
No, I go down there. I was going down there a lot, several times a year, to run workshops and so on. And in fact, in 2016, Faustus, my trio, were in residence there. And I was due to do a workshop weekend in June with a Turkish singer that I was talking about, and that has been cancelled or postponed. There are some weekends planned for next year once the place reopens. So Moira, come on down.
Fingers crossed. What do your sons play?
My youngest Joe sings and plays guitar and fiddle very badly by his own admission. He's very good at jazz as well as folk and classical, and he may well go down the choral scholarship path that David and I did. My middle son plays mandolin in a very, very good Katie band. My eldest son does DJing and producing.
And how much did you push them in terms of going into music?
Never. I told them to get a proper job, and that is probably what pushed them into going to music. They were rebelling against me. The oldest two don't do it for a living, and they're working. Joe, my youngest, may well end up becoming a musician of some sort. But I never pushed them. I just encouraged them, and they were surrounded by music. Their mum sings. Their grandparents all do music. We took them to festivals. They become to Sidmouth every year of their lives. So They didn't really stand a chance of not doing music somehow. But I never forced them to play an instrument, or I just encouraged them. Yes.
Nice. And so, which is your favourite Bellowhead studio
album? I think Hedonism, the one that's 10 years old this year, because it has so many, well, as I say, slightly vague memories though, but it was such a happy period. It was a groundbreaking album. We made it into the charts. It's the highest selling folk record on an independent label of all time, and it was just such a happy time for everyone. And the music itself, we all recorded it in the same room. It sounds really fresh, a bit rough around the edges, but you know, the real thing. So that's why for everyone.
And so that sort of, you felt that was like that really represented the band. That was like you guys really like how you'd like to be remembered.
Yeah, I think that album defined the band, definitely.
Right.
That was our classic.
And so what, apart from your solo Zoom gig, which actually has probably took up quite a lot of your time in lockdown, has there been any other, you know, fabulous escapades that have kept your days free of tedium?
I've never been so busy. I've been doing so much stuff. I've been working online with some dancers. That's been quite interesting. Contemporary dancers. I've been doing collaborations with various people, playing over, singing piano. I did a series of songs and tunes for VE Day for elderly people, like Lily Marlene and Michael Dover. We did a survey of people in an old people's home and their top 20 songs, which things like Singing in the Rain, Over the Rainbow, Qui Sera Sera. And so at the moment I'm working on those songs, which I'm going to put onto a USB stick and onto YouTube so that elderly people can watch them in isolation in their care homes. So I've really enjoyed it. Some of those old songs are brilliant.
Yeah.
So I've just been doing so many projects. I'm doing an online choir for Sidmouth Festival tomorrow night. I'm doing some more gigs online with my bands. I've got to record some fiddle for an online Kaylee. So yeah, I've never been busier, and also I've just done loads of gardening as well. My vegetable patch is going to have a tree.
And what about the folk scene more generally? How's that sort of going to get its act?
It's adapted. It's adapted really, really quickly. Particularly
more than the classical scene.
Well, I don't know because I'm not so in touch with the classical scene actually. But very early on, Oxford Folk Weekend got cancelled, and the organisers decided that they were going to try and do something on Zoom. And so I was in the first sort of cohort of people doing online concerts, and they really sussed out how to do it. They've now progressed to the point where I did a concert with Bellowhead's Feast for Oxford Folk Weekend last week, and we actually had a mixer with us which plugged in, and then an engineer up in Yorkshire or somewhere was mixing us on Zoom. So they've sussed the tech, and that's happening all over the folk world. To be honest, for years we've been saying the folk world needs to be a bit more tech and internet savvy, like the pop world, and it's happened. And so here at Sidmouth, for instance, last night I pre-recorded material and also streamed, and it's on YouTube to watch for another week. So it's using that technology, and a lot of folkies are quite techie anyway. So I think the folk scene's coped very well. It's just the uncertainty of knowing where live music is going to go in the future. When this festival here, they're talking about actually running it properly next year, but it may well be that we can't have any dancing due to non-contact. So those sort of things are really uncertain at the moment.
And what was your favourite song to perform in Bellowhead?
I can't really answer that. I mean, I'm very proud of London Town, which is one that I wrote, which is on the first album. But there's a beautiful song on Hedonism called Captain Wedderburn, which I like. And we also recorded Amsterdam on Hedonism, and I really like that as well.
We had one final question, which was, how different is your folk voice and your choral voice? Well, now that you feel that you've kind of found a voice that is genuinely something you feel really comfortable with.
I do sometimes find that my classical voice creeps into my folk voice. Hopefully it doesn't happen the other way around, because when you're, as you say, bashing out a mag and monk, it's not very appropriate to sort of do that. But I think they are quite different. I mean, hopefully they're still me, but I don't really do so much classical singing now anyway. I've done a little bit, but I've gone on the days of doing services and so on regularly.
Yeah. Well, Paul, it's been awesome to talk to you.
Great to see
Enjoy the
you.
rest of your time by the sea.
I will do.
We'll have to entice you to one of our concerts in the future.
I'll do. Absolutely. Yeah. Nice to meet everybody. And bye, everyone.
See you soon.